Hello and welcome again to the Patriots Go for Seven podcast. I am your host, Brandon DeFreitas, and your commissioner as well. One time champ. I know you'll see someone drop that later in the show. Um, so, today's episode, we had a lot planned. Some things came up here in the middle of recording the show. And as a result, you're going to have two interviews. Alex joins the show later, followed by John Krieger to discuss a recent trade. Um, but before we get to that, we're going to do a little bit of a week 6 review, followed by our waiver review, talk about the pickup of the week and the overpay of the week, and we'll wrap it up from there. We were going to talk a little bit of a Friday injury recap. We're probably not going to have as much time for that. Um, we'll cover it in the trade segment. Pat Mahomes got injured last night. So, I mean, high level, he had dislocated kneecap. Looks like the MRI went pretty well. So they're saying he'll miss a minimum of 3 games. They have a bye week after the fourth game. So, 3 games down the road, they have a game and then they have a bye week. So I would imagine they'd hold them out through the bye week, which would mean potentially 5 weeks without Pat Mahomes, um, which is huge for the league, and certainly helped grease the wheels of the trade we're going to talk about a little bit later. But moving into the week 6 review, Alex started off 0-3. He climbed to 3-3 this week. Kyler Murray, Hunter Henry were key additions who had huge weeks for him. And really, like, looking at the rest of the season outlook, Alex is going to be a competitor. He's going to be a playoff team. He's going to be in the playoff hunt, and I would expect him to be a playoff team. Great job out of him. I think early season, he's the top in-season manager in the league. I felt like I had a lot of good in-season management last season, but Alex with the Kyler and Hunter Henry additions off waivers takes the cake so far. My team improved to 6-0, least points against, which you kind of need when you're going to be 6-0. A lot of luck so far, but I'll take it. I've had some bad luck fantasy seasons in the past, so I don't feel too guilty about that. I was close to most points for Alex and I both putting up 176. He had about 0.5 more points last week. We see David go down to 0-6. Unfortunate to see this. He is a good team. He's an active manager. Has done 2 trades. I'm expecting you're gonna see better results from him in future seasons. He really needs to run the table now. 7-6 is the minimum to make the playoffs that we've seen historically under this format. So he has to run the table, and it just seems unlikely. Hopefully, he sticks with it and tries to knock a few teams off because he can really make a difference to the playoff landscape with how good of a roster he has. JoJo and Michelle started 3-0, dropped 3 straight games. They're now 3-3. This was all Saquon Barkley. I mean, Saquon Barkley was there in the 3-0 run. They lose Saquon and 0-3. So they get Saquon back this week. Hopefully they get a win in the win column here. And playing Kevin Lee, it's kind of like a get right matchup against a 1-5 team. And finally, here for the Week 6 review, Will Dissly got injured. One of the better team names was Walt Dissly for Tony, and we saw here when Will Dissly tore his Achilles tendon. He's out for the season, and Tony made this crazy funny logo with his old logo on a gravestone and said "R.I.P. Walt Dissly." It's the team name of the year and the logo of the year, and I just love seeing that. So thank you for those contributions, Tony. Keep it up. I'm sorry you lost Will Dissly. That definitely is a tough one. Given your activity on the waiver wire, I would expect he continues to find good players and fill the gap there. All right, moving on to the waivers. And apologies, we've been kind of like going through this opening segment pretty quickly because we have some exciting interviews coming up. And really want to spend the majority of this week's podcast listening to what Alex and Krieger have to say. Pickup of the week, Sam Darnold for $6. This was Jason's first fab, so we don't want to gloss that over. His first time he's ever spent fab in the league. And Sam Darnold's rest of season schedule is very nice. We'll pull it up so you can hear it. He plays the Patriots, so you don't want to play him there. He plays Jacksonville, which initially wasn't looking great the week after, but they no longer have Jalen Ramsey, so maybe there's something there. You could start him. You probably won't, though. But after Jacksonville starting in week 9, he plays against Miami, the Giants, Washington, Oakland, Cincinnati, Miami, and in week 15, the Baltimore, who hasn't really had a great pass defense this year. Granted, you can't look too far in advance because Baltimore has Jimmy Smith, one of their best cornerback. Well, not their best. They have Marlon Humphrey, one of their best cornerbacks, Jimmy Smith, on the mend. Probably will be back by then, so maybe that'll solve their problems. Either way, though, Darnold's going to be startable from week 9 through week 14, and week 14 fantasy playoff time against Miami. Gotta love that matchup. I think it was a worthwhile $6 addition for Jason. So that is your pickup of the week from waivers. Your overpay of the week: Jamal Williams, John Krieger. Um, Jamal Williams is a great player, so I really didn't want to put him in this segment. Good pickup, good volume on an offense. He gets like 50-50 work with Aaron Jones. Aaron Jones is just the more talented player who puts up more yards and touchdowns. But if either of them get hurt, the other one's going to have a good amount of value. And we saw Aaron Jones dropped a key catch early in that game that would have been a touchdown, and Williams got more work after that. So yeah, it's a lot of money, but it's a usable running back, which is a rare commodity. So I can't really complain that much about it. It's a slow week on waivers. You spend $62. Unfortunately, you're going to get the overpay of the week, but still a good addition from Krieger. Interesting additions: N'Keal Harry going for $7 to Tony. It's interesting because N'Keal Harry was definitely being drafted before he got injured, and he's eligible to return week 9. We're in week 7. Whether or not he does, there's some uncertainty. So it was just interesting to see him picked up when it might be a couple of weeks before you see any result there. And finally, Andrew Donaher picked up Damian Harris, who's been inactive for most games for the Patriots. Don't really see any value for Damian Harris, even if there were some injuries. I think it would take a Sony Michel injury to really give Harris any sort of value, because otherwise it's just going to be a lot of James White, Rex Burkhead, Sony Michel mixing it up as each of them gets banged up. So it's interesting. It's just not the kind of guy I would want to hold. All right. Well, with that, we'll just cover some of the Friday injury recap. I said we wouldn't have a lot of time, but we have a couple minutes here. Todd Gurley looks like he's going to play Sunday. Malcolm Brown won't. So I just don't expect Todd Gurley to be a 90% snap count player, and I expect to see more Darrell Henderson uh, in in a role. So against that Atlanta defense, could be an interesting player. Alvin Kamara out for Sunday. So Latavius Murray is available, and I believe starting for Andrew Donaher. David Johnson is a game time decision Sunday. We'll see how that goes. Check back Sunday morning. Make sure, I guess that would be Alex, make sure that he's playing. And Pat Mahomes, we're going to get into this with a trade that just went through, and it's up for voting. Uh, Pat Mahomes injured his knee. We talked about that earlier, and yeah, it's unfortunate. I hope we see him again this season, but I also hope that we see Pat Mahomes as what he is, and he doesn't damage his knee further, kind of like what Robert Griffin III did by returning too soon, and really never was the same guy again. The most important thing is I don't want that to happen to Mahomes, and I want us to be able to watch for years and years the what he can do on a football field, because he's one of the best quarterbacks I've ever seen watching the sport. All right, with that, we'll move on, and we're going to talk to Alex about bye week replacements, followed by a impromptu call with John Krieger. All right, and we're back, and we have Alex on the line. Alex, how's it going?
Pretty good. How you doing, Brandon?
Not too bad. Thanks for joining the podcast, second week in a row.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
No problem. So what we're going to be covering this week is bye week replacements, going through the teams, seeing who everyone picked up and tried to replace in their lineup. This is really the first big bye week of the season, and certainly a lot of people went out and tried to do their best to fill some gaps. So the first one we'll cover here is Tom. Tom has Nick Chubb on bye this week, and to replace him, he picked up Mark Walton, the number 2 running back for the Dolphins, who got 12 touches last week and 75 yards, and might have an increased role as they look to trade Kenyon Drake.
Yeah, definitely a good pickup by Tom. Anytime you can get a guy who's getting some quality touches there at the running back position on waivers, it's a pretty rare occurrence. I actually didn't know that about Kenyon Drake, that he was on the market looking to be traded, so that could even be a valuable guy, going forward. Obviously, the main problem with the Dolphins is that they're trailing in every game, but I don't know if I'm not too familiar with him, but is he a pass catcher? Can he provide some value in the passing game?
I think he can do a little bit of everything. He came from University of Florida, had some personal off-field problems there, but has always been a talented running back. The Cincinnati Bengals, of all teams, actually cut him last year, going into this year because of off-field problems. And if you have off-field problems with the Cincinnati Bengals, that tells you certainly have some trouble going on.
Yeah.
But I mean, Tom was in a bit of a bind. He's already starting Jordan Howard in the tough matchup at Dallas, and Peyton Barber and Nick Chubb, his normal two starting running backs, are both on bye.
Yep.
I know you mentioned too. If you look at Nick Chubb and Jarvis Landry, both are on bye, and this is the thing when you have players on the same team. I've had it before. John B's going to have it when the Cowboys are on bye. It certainly puts you in a bind when you end up hitting those weeks.
Yeah, I mean, John's whole team is going to go on by. Didn't he have the Cowboys defense one week? I mean, that's. But yeah, it's kind of tough during the draft when you're looking at guys and what even if he has a good value and you say, oh crap, I already have a guy on that team.
Right.
But obviously, the quarterback wide receiver stack has its pros and cons. I think that's becoming a pretty common thing to do in fantasy, to give yourself some more firepower on the 12-point touchdown plays. I've actually had the past couple of years the quarterback running back stack, which kind of goes a little bit against when they're in the red zone, unless you get some of these pass catching guys like David Johnson, or I had McCaffrey last year, and you actually can get that stack. But it's also a pretty good feeling that you get in the red zone, you're like, well, either my quarterback's throwing it or my running back's running it in.
Right.
Then you get the backup running back vulture come in and you start throwing your remote at the TV. So.
For sure. And you alluded to the fact that during the draft, it's hard to look at these situations and think about bye weeks. I know, as someone who's active on the waiver wire and in trades, I don't really pay a whole lot of attention to bye weeks. I try to pick the best player available and figure that when the time comes, I'm gonna go out and I'm gonna find a way to solve my own problem. But if you look at some teams like Jason or even Matt Green, who are a little less active, it could be something to pay attention to during the draft.
Yeah, definitely. The alternative is just to just kind of stack up or not pay attention and then say, hey, I got a couple big bye weeks here, and just kind of take the auto L,
right?
Or look elsewhere and be okay with it, and know you're going to be solidified for the remainder of the weeks. But definitely an interesting strategy there. I think the biggest one that it comes into play is with the quarterback position. If you're going to pick a backup quarterback or invest in it, just make sure that they don't have the same bye week. That's pretty fantasy 101. But
right.
Yeah. But other than that, yeah, and it's kind of hard if you have two stud running backs and they both have the same bye week. But then you can look at it like, hey, I'll get through that bye week, maybe I'll squeak out a win, and then I have these two stud running backs for every other week. So there's pros and cons to both strategies.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. I completely agree with you there. Well, the next team is actually my own. Couple of big bye weeks here. James Conner and Mike Evans, first two picks in my draft. And then a guy, Curtis Samuel, who's been a bye week fill-in throughout the season for me. So with those guys gone, I have James Conner as being replaced by David Montgomery. Tough matchup against New Orleans, though. What do you think of that one?
Yeah, tough matchup for sure. But again, from a volume standpoint, especially with Chicago not really having a solid option at quarterback, you can think that the running backs are gonna get some volume in that game. So I definitely like that fill, and it's pretty interesting looking at your team this week, because between your bye weeks and then the Rams, backups, but soon to be maybe a starter, a replacement to Gurley,
yep,
and then Malcolm Brown and Darrell Henderson, you look at your bench and you almost can't play anyone.
Yeah.
So I guess Henderson, I'm not sure the status on Gurley, but it looks like Malcolm Brown's doubtful, so maybe Henderson would be a sneaky play. But
Yep.
I don't think you can make it. But it's interesting to have your whole bench be non-viable guys for a week. It's pretty interesting.
Oh, for sure. I guess it eliminates some sort of second guessing to an extent. Um, but yeah, so Gurley's out this week. No, not Gurley. Sorry. Gurley's probably in this week. Malcolm Brown's out. I'm considering maybe starting Henderson only because of the Atlanta matchup, and they have a terrible defense. And I just don't see how you play Gurley 90% of snaps when he's going to be playing at less than 100%.
Yep. Yeah, that'd be a sneaky play there.
The other guys here to highlight, Alan Lazard is in for Mike Evans on my team. Lazard, a guy who didn't get into the Packers Monday night game until after Rodgers went over to the receiver coach and said, can you put this guy in?" and lobbied for him. And now you look at this week, Marquez Valdez-Scantling, Devontae Adams, and Geronimo Allison are all either out or doubtful. So it looks like Alan Lazard's going to potentially be the number one guy this year. And, you've seen Aaron Rodgers rave about him. It's definitely caught my attention as a bye week fill-in.
Yeah, I think I dropped the ball a little bit on that because I was watching the game and you saw Rodgers rave about him in the post-game press conference or post-game on-field interview. And I'm like, man, this might be a good pickup, like you said, for a week or two, especially with Adams out. But yeah, now, did you drop any fab on him? Because I totally dropped the ball and didn't even put any claim for him.
Only $1 this week on Alan Lazard.
Great value.
Yeah, for sure. Appreciate it. I think he's one of those guys that slid through just because he only played for one quarter, and even though he got a touchdown, he doesn't show up at the top of the board. And in fact, I know his projection for this week is still like it might be 2 points or 0 points. So just like
that's NFL.com for you,
Definitely.
This guy is the number one wideout over there. At least for this week, he's definitely going to be getting more than 2 points.
Right.
But good on NFL.com rankings there. You brought up an interesting point on him kind of sliding down the rankings. That could be it. I wonder just how many people were actually watching the game last week and kind of saw that connection. Because it was so late in the game, but it definitely stood out to me. But then I totally dropped the ball on it. I would have bet a few fab on him. So it's an interesting thing to think about.
I got lucky watching it too because I can't stand the Monday Night Football crew. I think they're incredibly boring. Between Booger McFarland and I can't even remember, is it Gene Stessator or whatever? Man, I started watching Archer on my main TV and then had the game on. But as I always do, I flip over when Aaron Rodgers has the ball and he's down. It's just like, it's always great TV. And that's when Lazard went in, and I was like, who is this guy? Because he had the great touchdown. And then the other play that impressed me was he caught a short pass and plowed over the defensive back. And I was like, wow, like I kind of like to see that.
Yeah, he put his head down and just kind of, for a few extra yards. Just
right.
No regard to human life there. You brought up a good point though. Aaron Rodgers is down, and you're like, oh man, this is good. This is must-see TV, and if it's not, then the refs are definitely going to make it that way.
Right, and they did because the Packers probably shouldn't have won that game. The Lions got hosed by those hands to the face penalties on Trey Flowers.
Yeah, brutal.
I had a moment during that game though. Not that I didn't think those should have been penalties. But I was like, it's so crazy to watch the Patriots. And here's Trey Flowers, who was their best defensive lineman last year. They're like, go ahead, pay him. We don't need him. And then they replace him with Michael Bennett. And then they're like, we don't really need Michael Bennett either. And we still have the number one defense in the league.
Yeah, it's amazing. I mean, they've done this over the years where they've been really stellar at looking at talent and knowing when to pay guys and when not to. And a couple ones that, or at least the big one that jumps off the board as a miss would be Richard Seymour. I think when they let him go, they should have probably paid him, to stick around when he was in his prime. I think that there's been another big one that's slipping my head, but definitely the Seymour one is the only one where you really think that they probably should have paid the man. But they've been really good at kind of knowing when these guys are not going to be valuable. You look at even this past offseason, and what was the offensive tackle that went to the Raiders?
Trent Brown. Yep.
Trent Brown, and now he's into some personal problems, which you never want to see. But
Yep.
he wasn't even doing that great either, and he gets this monster deal.
Yep.
And, so they've always been on the forefront of knowing when to move on from these guys when the big contract comes up.
For sure, completely agreed. Well, I guess the last bye week here to replacement to cover is Dante Pettis, a guy you owned last week before pivoting to Auden Tate. I'd still rather have Auden Tate in my spot here than Pettis, but Pettis is a guy who has had an increasing snap rate, had 6 targets, which is his highest on the season, tackled twice at the 2 yard line last week. But again, it's a run heavy offense, probably not a whole lot of volume.
Yeah. Between him and Auden Tate, it was kind of a toss up. I think for immediate value, I like Tate just because the Bengals have been down in these games and he's gotten a ton of targets. But you look at a guy like Pettis, and he was really good last year, and he's on the second best team. I'm going to put Pats ahead of them, obviously, but the only other undefeated team in the league. And you just think if he solidifies himself as the number one target, he's got to start getting touchdowns, and he's going to have value. So I do like that pickup. I think that he should be owned, and hopefully ends up getting into the end zone for you.
Yep, absolutely. All right, moving on to Matt's team. Couple of bye weeks here. Matt has Juju Smith-Schuster and Ronald Jones on bye. Ronald Jones he replaced with Duke Johnson. Any thoughts on that one?
Yeah, Duke Johnson was definitely talked about a lot on this offseason. I actually really liked him when he came over from the Browns, and I always thought that he had a lot of upside, and then he was going to be the kind of number one running back there. And then they go and trade for, I believe, or sign Carlos Hyde. I think they traded for him, and it's really taken a big hit on Duke Johnson's value. But I do like that the way that the Texans have been playing, especially on the offensive side of the ball. So I think anytime you get a running back on kind of a high-powered offense like that, there's always hope that he's going to end up catching a pass from someone like Deshaun Watson and making his way into the end zone. So not a bad bye week fill-in there on that side.
Mm-hmm. And for Juju Smith-Schuster, Matt, this is the one I'm going to throw a little bit of shade at here. Matt picked up Demaryius Thomas. And I don't really like the Demaryius Thomas addition because I'm convinced, much like Bill Belichick was, that Demaryius is done. And you have him facing New England, and while he might not get the Stephon Gilmore coverage that Robbie Anderson has, that's still the number one defense, and it's still Jason McCourty. So I don't really expect big things there. I think Matt could have done a little bit better with this addition.
Yeah, definitely. Just to play a little devil's advocate here, there's been a lot of talk in the news about Demaryius Thomas being a bit upset on the way he was treated, or the things that were promised to him, or he thinks were promised to him over here in New England by Bill Belichick. So this could be a chance for him to kind of have a revenge game over there.
Mm-hmm.
I know it's two great defenses playing. The Patriots obviously number one, and then Greg Williams has that defense playing pretty well. Yep. But I do think it could end up being a decent scoring game over there in the Meadowlands. So it will be interesting to watch that and see if Demaryius Thomas can kind of get his revenge game.
For sure. Hey, I'm one. I always like a stroll down narrative street, and Demaryius Thomas revenge game certainly would be such.
Yeah.
Looking at across to the other team in this matchup, Jason, he had one important bye week here with Greg Olsen, his tight end, replaced him with what is the ghost of Jimmy Graham, a player who just got into practice today, so I believe he is going to play, and with all the receiver injuries, that benefits Graham as well as Lazard.
Yeah, definitely. Jimmy Graham, always an attractive name when you see him on the draft board as you're drafting. If you've been playing fantasy for a while, back to his days in New Orleans,
yep.
You're like, Jimmy Graham, and then he just hasn't really seemed to put it together with the Packers there. But he is targeted a decent amount, and every time they go in the red zone, seems like he gets a pass from Aaron Rodgers. He usually drops it, or usually gets bodied or what have you. But he does usually get a few targets down there in the red zone, and the announcers always call him out, Jimmy Graham, 6'5".
Yeah.
So and not a horrible guy. You just hope that he catches a touchdown and gets 30 or 40 yards, and then you're looking at a 10-plus point game.
Yep, agreed. All right, moving on to a success story in terms of the bye weeks. John B. Of course, John B. He has an important bye this week. Chris Godwin, the number one overall fantasy receiver, and John B just throws in Royce Freeman into the lineup and gets that rushing TD, 14.7 points. Definitely a successful bye week replacement right there.
Yeah, for sure. And it just seems like with Waller Bills, John B's team this year, every player he picks up turns into a gold nugget, and ends up being pooped on whoever he's playing that week.
Right.
But the matchup was really attractive. The Chiefs have had a really bad defense again this year, and especially their running game has been, they've been susceptible to the running attacks. So definitely a good pickup there on John's standpoint. And they do have two guys over there for the Broncos. So looking over to my opponent, Tony, this week, and he kind of got the hose.
Yep.
With Philip Lindsay, who's I believe a top 12 guy right now, and I was really worried about that matchup and kind of watching it, and all of a sudden he puts up 3.7. So John gets the touchdown, gets a little bit more yardage, and just unlucky for Tony there with a good matchup and not having this guy produce.
Oh, for sure, absolutely unlucky. And speaking of Philip Lindsay, he's potentially the bye week replacement identified for Christian McCaffrey, who is out on bye for Tony.
Yep.
Or you could even say that maybe Philip Lindsay at this point is a full week start, is an every week starter, and Dorsett is the guy he's plugging in. And like you said, that could be a high scoring game in the Meadowlands. So Dorsett's not a bad guy to plug in for a bye week.
Yeah, definitely. And anytime you have a top 15, definitely top 12 running back, you're not going to be putting him on the bench, especially against a really good matchup. So it was pretty much just unlucky there. So I do agree with you that Lindsay's pretty much a weekly starter. The only kind of thing that I'll mention about that is it's just real tough when you have these running backs on poor offenses. And if you watched that game last night, it was just brutal. I mean, Flacco looked like he was disinterested, and that offense was just terrible. So if you have a running back on a terrible offense, it's not really like the quarterback or who's guaranteed to get some points. They can really put up these big duds.
Mm-hmm. Completely agreed. It's tough on the bat, and plus you get less touchdown upside.
Yep.
Really seems like with these Denver backs, whoever gets the touchdown is going to have a big game. So last week it was Philip Lindsay. This week it was Royce Freeman.
Yeah, the thing that I like about Lindsay, though, is he's kind of the home run hitter. So he's always able to bust off a big game, and it just didn't happen this past game. So he's one of those players that keeps you on the edge of your toes when you're playing against him, or he's kind of one screen pass or one run away from busting at 60 yards, but it just didn't happen.
He was last night too. There was one play, I forget what quarter was in, but looked like he was about to break one. There was a safety who didn't have a great angle on him, and that was all between him and the end zone. And Lindsay was tripped up by the last man at the line of scrimmage. He was just getting ahead of steam too. So to your point, he easily could have been a double-digit fantasy start based on that play alone.
Wow, no kidding. Yeah, I missed that play, but thankfully for me, it didn't end up coming to fruition.
There's one other I didn't notice at first while making notes, but DJ Moore on your team is on bye. He's been in your lineup more weeks than not. Certainly was getting more targets while Cam Newton was the quarterback there in Carolina. But you replaced him with a guy you acquired in trade from me, and Devin Singletary. Nice matchup against Miami. You have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think they're pretty much similar guys. I do think DJ Moore has a higher floor, so to speak. He's been really, really reliable, but I think he's only gotten in the end zone once this year. But he's still seeing a good amount of targets, even with Kyle Allen. But it looks like he might be kind of playing second fiddle to Curtis Samuel in terms of usage. But pretty low key kind of change there. I've been waiting to plug Singletary into the lineup because he's kind of an explosive change of pace guy. Apparently has some pretty good running skill too. So definitely the matchup against the Dolphins there, and it was kind of a no-brainer whether or not there was a bye week or not. I think Singletary was going to make his way into the lineup.
For sure, absolutely. And he's I was reading the stat that he's still in the, I forget what top, he might be top 5 for runs over 20 yards on the season or something, and he hasn't played since week 2. So
wow, that's crazy.
Yeah. Definitely had a good start to the year. So let's move on to Andrew's team. He has Odell Beckham Jr. on bye. Replaced him with Willie Snead, who is just kind of like a steady player. I don't think he's really hit double digits yet this year, but he always gets a handful of catches and a handful of yards. So for a guy that I've been kind of throwing shade at for not being really active, it's a solid bye week replacement for him.
Yeah, definitely. I think he picked up Snead not this week, but the previous week when we featured him on Kyle Rudolph, who almost made his way into the end zone as we were watching those games. We were kind of laughing about it,
but that's how these things tend to work.
Thankfully for our suggestions on last week's pod, Rudolph didn't end up getting into the end zone, so it was a good drop there.
Yep.
But the other guy that he added that I saw that it was in his lineup was Ted Ginn. And the thing about Ginn, he's kind of like the ageless wonder there, kind of like Deshaun Jackson. I like him when Breeze is there. I think he's a guy that can make a big gain and change the tune of your fantasy week. But they have checked down Teddy Bridgewater, starting.
I like the nickname.
Yeah, I just don't know how much value Ginn really has, or but then you look at the game that happened last night, and you have Tyreek Hill who's putting up a goose egg into the fourth, it seemed like, or at least late into the third, and then all of a sudden Matt Moore rips off a huge one, and Tyreek Hill gets a 60-yard bomb or whatever it was. So all it takes with some of those guys is just one big play, and then it's a viable fantasy league.
Mm-hmm. For sure, absolutely. I guess the last thing to note is he is starting two tight ends with Jason Witten in the flex. Witten, a guy who doesn't get a whole lot of touchdowns, but has been fairly steady. It's kind of tough when you're starting Witten and starting Willie Snead. And you know what? This actually happened live while we've been on. Willie Snead has been benched for, I'm trying to figure out who it was. James White, I think.
Let's check it out.
I didn't even know he had James White on his team.
Yeah, we don't have a live podcast yet, so it's not like he was listening to this and making a change over here.
Right.
But again, it's nice to see people active. It's 8 p.m. on a Friday night. People could be out pounding beers, and instead they're moving around Willie Snead in their lineup. So.
Or you're pounding beers and moving Willie Snead.
True. I actually think that's what he's doing right now. Yeah, look at that. Yeah, James White. I like it. It's tough with these New England running backs. You see, he also has Damian Harris, who might be a questionable ad right now, but kind of toss up there. I don't know how I feel. How do you feel about that between White and Snead?
I mean, I like White a little bit better just because I think he's guaranteed. He's in a better offense and can always get that touchdown from Brady, and he gets a lot of target volume from Brady. And we were talking about how like one of the things with Lazard is that it's nice when Aaron Rodgers trusts you. It's the same with Tom Brady, and Tom Brady's getting a little grumpier in his old age where he doesn't want to throw to the young guys. So I could see James White getting a good amount of target volume.
Yeah, not a bad. It's always one of those things where you make the last minute change and you're like, oh man, if I lose the game because I should have started Willie Snead, I'm going to be kicking myself.
Right,
so
for sure.
Some of these, even those flex plays, it's so nerve wracking when you make these last minute changes to whether or not you're doing it right or not.
It definitely is, no doubt about that. Well, I think that wraps up our bye week replacement segment. But before we let you go, we do want to give you a chance to talk to Krieger, who listens to the podcast. And Krieger just lost Pat Mahomes. And you're sitting here with three good quarterbacks, Kyler Murray, Jameis Winston, and Josh Allen. Krieger had Jameis Winston at first and cut him. You have any words for him, or just want to grease the wheels for a trade?
Yeah, okay. Kyler Murray, you mean? You had Kyler Murray, right?
Yep, Kyler Murray,
yeah,
sorry.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. Kyler Murray is not on the block, so I think he was ranked somewhere in the low teens when I picked him up on your suggestion too. Kudos to that. And now he's ranked the 7th quarterback. So when you look at it on a week by week basis, he must be kind of a top 4, top 5 guy over the past 3 weeks to have climbed that high in the rankings.
Yep.
Which is huge. Probably a big part of my recent success here. I do like pairing him with David Johnson again. Kind of curbs your upside, but Johnson is really involved in the passing game, so It's kind of that same Newton and McCaffrey thing I had going last year, which obviously didn't get me too far. But but yeah, as far as Winston and Josh Allen, both are on the block. I definitely don't need 3. Allen's a little bit tougher to kind of, you look at him and you're like, well, he's not really ranked that high, but then you look at the matchups that he had, and I actually had him in my lineup up until yesterday, and I saw that Kyler Murray was the start of the week against the Giants, and I'm like, you know what? I was like, if I lose this game because I went with Josh Allen, the
Right.
sexy matchup against the Dolphins, and
Mm-hmm.
I'd be kicking myself. So I think I'm gonna ride out Kyler Murray unless it's a real bad matchup, and then probably play the matchup game from there. But both with decent matchups. The one thing about the Giants is you look at how the Patriots played them a couple weeks ago, and they really struggled. So it's kind of hard to plug in Murray, but the Giants defense hasn't been that great, and Murray does a lot with his feet. So
Yep.
definitely that's where I'm going there. And like I said, the other two guys are on the block for sure.
All right. Well, Krieger, you can make the call, and Alex, thanks for making the call into the program. Gonna have it sponsored by your company, the DeFreitas Enterprises. I'm wearing the hat right now. It's a video pod, so thank you for sponsoring the cast, and thank you for calling in.
Awesome. Thanks for having me. And I want to send you a quick congratulations on being 6-0. You're the last undefeated team this week. So I'm low key cheering for you. First off,
Appreciate
you're
it.
playing John Krieger is in my division, so I definitely want you to get the win there. And we're actually playing each other next week, I believe, in
Yep.
the annual DeFreitas Bowl.
Yep.
So I'm hoping to hand you your first loss there, so you can't lose this week, because I'm gonna send you that first L next week.
Yeah, you get me without Lamar Jackson and Mark Andrews, which is pretty nice a week after you get Tony without Christian McCaffrey. So
Yep.
you gotta love those matchups, and we always look forward to the Freitas Bowl. I was saying too earlier, I kind of wish it was Thanksgiving. We had that one year, and that's always wicked fun because you're watching all day. But we'll take it in week 8, and good luck to you, and we'll definitely see you next week.
Awesome. Sounds good. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Talk to you later.
See ya.
See ya. Well, that was Alex. And I'll wrap up our bye week replacement part of this segment, and we'll come back quick to wrap this up and look forward to next week. We're back, and we have a surprise segment. We have John Krieger on the phone. Krieger, how's it going?
Good. I'm surprised you didn't say two-time league champion. I think I am, right? Or
Yeah, 2-time league champ. I'm sorry, I didn't throw the resume out there.
That's okay. That's okay. I'm a humble guy.
I mean, if we want to do the full resume, wouldn't Doherty call it the drug suspension the one year you forgot to join, or?
Yeah, I did have a short term, kind of like a Josh Gordon year there, midway through.
I think Parnell joined and we thought it was you, and it was so that's where it went. But
yeah, exactly.
The reason we wanted to talk to you so quickly is while we were talking to Alex, we had a trade in the league, and it's a big one. One that's definitely going to change the course of the season for both teams, one way or the other. You and John B. Looks like you're receiving Darren Waller and Carson Wentz in exchange for Patrick Mahomes and Austin Hooper. Why don't you give us a little bit of your perspective on the deal?
Yeah, for me, I mean, just looking at the quarterback pool the next few weeks, Andy Dalton looks like the only reasonable play here. And so I really felt like I needed to upgrade there. Unfortunately, I drafted Kyler Murray and had held on to him for a little while, but I wound up dropping him, which, maybe you could look at that as a big mistake. But just looking at the free agent pool, there was really nothing. And not just short term, but long term, I don't have a ton of confidence in Mahomes with this injury.
Mm-hmm.
Even if he were to come back and play pretty well, he hadn't been putting up huge numbers anyway. So I just view him as a kind of a league average QB1 at this point.
Yep.
So why not get something more secure, and even with maybe even a little more potential? And I saw John B with the Dak and the Wentz quarterback situation, and figured, what if he maybe is willing to take a shot on Mahomes for one of them,
right?
And then he could upgrade somewhere else too. So I figured that would be enticing for him. And for me, I just feel like it's not even just the fact not knowing if Mahomes is going to play. It's carrying the roster spot, and
yeah,
it's a tough position to be in. So to go from Austin Hooper to Waller, maybe that's a bit of a downgrade. But if gun to my head, would I say 60% sure Hooper's going to outscore him the rest of the year? I don't know. I mean, I wouldn't bet a ton on that.
Yeah, and Waller's been the number one target guy for the Raiders, so that's going to help him out too. And I think Hooper's currently playing a little bit above what you normally would expect. Part of it due to that Atlanta offensive line being so bad that Ryan's just checking down all day.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I like Hooper, but it's tough because he's not. You wouldn't say he's like the week to week number one. I don't know. I feel like for me, John B, it makes sense for both teams.
Yeah.
It's just going to kind of come down to like a little bit of luck here because I think I'm hoping if I can just get into the playoffs, I'll be a competitor. But yeah, I just didn't feel. I felt like my season was kind of unraveling a little bit if I didn't make a move here. So right. I just felt like I had to do something.
Makes sense. Oh, absolutely. And for John B, he gets a player where like if he believes Mahomes is going to return more than an average QB1 value over the second half of the season, that could be a player to carry him through the fantasy playoffs potentially.
Yeah, I mean he doesn't really have to worry that much about a playoff berth at this point. I guess the downside for him is if it makes me better and potentially I get ahead of him in the standings. So maybe that's a consideration. But I probably would have done it if I were him, just because. I mean, it's tough to week by week play two good quarterbacks. I mean,
right.
You wind up feeling bad if you pick the wrong one week to week. So, why not deal one, get better at another position, and then you have the added upshot of this, other quarterback who maybe, could even be a league winner down the stretch. So I think it made sense for him too.
For sure. Oh, I completely agree. I mean, could potentially take one of the stronger teams in the league and give him a bigger weapon. I think from your perspective, you look at Pat Mahomes, and they're saying he's going to miss at least 3 games, which would take him to Week 11 against the Chargers, and then they have the Week 12 bye. And it's if you're the Chiefs, why are you going to play him Week 11 before a bye? So he's probably out those 4 weeks plus a bye, so that's 5 weeks where you were going to have to figure out the quarterback position.
Yep.
And, like you said, John B has Dak Prescott, so he doesn't have to worry about that. But, from your perspective, you can't really afford to look at 5 weeks without a quarterback. And then we're not even sure he's really going to return, What if the Chiefs end up dropping a bunch of games and they're not looking as strong in the playoff hunt? Are you going to risk your franchise quarterback? And even more so, Pat Mahomes, who's due for a big contract, is he going to risk playing before he gets paid?
It's an interesting situation because they've got 2 tough weeks the Chiefs do against the Vikings and Packers the next 2 weeks. I think they're probably going to drop both of those games, so they'll have 4 losses. Mm-hmm. And then they've got the bye, so they're probably going to sit Mahomes, before that bye. And then I think I still got a good shot at the playoffs even with Andy Dalton the rest of the way. But I certainly won't get a bye, I don't think. And Week 14, Mahomes at New England, off kind of an injury situation where we're not even sure. I mean, is he even playable that week for me? I guess I would have to play him unless I had some other option. But
right.
I almost view him as like it's tough because you just look at week by week and it's like, does this guy really even have value in fantasy? I even considered dropping him, to be quite honest with you.
Oh wow, yeah.
Which sounds ridiculous, but it's just a tough situation to be in because I feel like the Chiefs maybe can work around him being out for a while and maybe win a couple of games and still make the playoffs. But in terms of fantasy, the week to week matchups don't look good for him moving forward. At least at this point.
Right. Yeah. Well, I appreciate you joining us and giving us your perspective. Hopefully we can have you on the pod again sometime. I'd love to have you join.
Yeah, give me a call anytime. Trying to make it a 3-time winner this year.
I'm trying to get into double digits here, and I've been in from the start too, so a little embarrassing. But John B's trying to beat me with a 2-time here, and maybe this trade helps him.
Yeah. Well, we got the second and third teams, and trying to keep pace with you. So hopefully one of us improves at least.
I'll tell you, I've been getting the luck bug so far this year. I have the lowest points against, and then last night while Mahomes was healthy, he threw a touchdown to Hardman, which kind of put me behind the 8 ball. and then for Tyreek Hill to score a touchdown after Mahomes' injury. That's just pure
Yeah,
luck right there.
That's a tough blow for me when I saw that.
Right.
But yeah, especially when your quarterback's out, and yeah, it's just that's a tough one. But yeah, still competitive this week. If I can squeak out a win, it doesn't really hurt you at all.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, it would be big for my playoff chances.
For sure. Well, good luck. I always enjoy our matchups, and we'll see you next time.
Good luck.
All right. Thanks, John.
Take care.
Later. Wow. Right in the middle of recording the pod, we had a trade. Thank you to John for joining. Very interesting, and you can see both sides of it. You look at John B, and he's trying to win a championship, and he has a quarterback, and he's coming from the perspective of Pat Mahomes could return, be the number one quarterback. I'm gonna do it. Then Krieger's like, I want to save my season. I think Krieger's 4-2, and not so much save his season, but like if he goes 5 weeks without Pat Mahomes, it might be tough to make the playoffs. So interesting trade all around. You gotta love the activity. I'm liking that we're having all this increased activity in the league. So let's go. Awesome. Uh, Unexpected segment, but this is what we want to hear. And if anyone out there wants to join the podcast, one time, just give me a ring, and I'd love to have you. All right, so now we're gonna go through and try to wrap up the cast. We'll be right back. John Krieger, and thanks again to Alex and John for joining. It's awesome having you guys, and um, definitely helps keep things interesting on the daily here on the podcast. Well, that's gonna wrap it up for the Week 7 edition of the Patriots Go for 7 podcast, sponsored by DeFreitas Enterprises. I'm your host, Brandon DeFreitas, and your commissioner, and we'll see you next week.